Hello, hello, hello. My camera's white balance has been put out of whack because today we're gonna be discussing Cappadocians, which is the original necromancer vampire. But also, they have this issue where originally Cappadocians had that issue where their corpse like pallor remained no matter how much blood that they drank. And in fact, after a while, it got worse, and they would even end up taking this shriveled and bony appearance that is extra corpse like. So, their downside is their paleness, hence the exaggerated paleness on me and the black and white picture which depicts Cappadocians on their wiki page. Though these ones are more harbinger of skulls, though we're gonna talk about them in a little bit. So, first of all, welcome to the videos where I cover Vampire the Masquerade's Necromancer bloodlines. So then the Cappadocian bloodline has been begun by a vampire named Cappadocius, as you know, the bloodline implies through its name. Cappadocius was one of the very weird third generation vampires because for the longest time, they didn't actually want to take and make any vampires or children. They were not invested in politics, they were not really going for power or for wealth. So they were very disinterested in making more of themselves in order to command and get them to do anything. They were very much fine with just existing on their own, as their own life's passion was to investigate death and dying and what may come after, hence, the necromantic aspect, until they realize that this is an undertaking so grand that the universe will probably cease to exist before they themselves crack the code as to what death and dying is. Hence why Cappadocius ended up taking first a singular mortal and turning them into a vampire. They didn't want to have a big bloodline. They didn't really want to be like a big clan. They just wanted other people to share in their exact goal and the exact thing that they're trying to do here, which is study death. With about the birth of Christianity, Cappadocius actually converted to Christianity. It was one of the very few, let's say, believing vampires, because Cappadocius ended up with a very weird idea as to what his goals and his life or unlife are gonna be. His goal, believe it or not, became I'm gonna eat God. Like, I'm gonna meet God and then I'm gonna eat God. Like, that is what fueled this dude's like desire to continue progressing and learning more about death and trying to infiltrate the underworld. Uh, Weird guy, not gonna lie. So, for the most part, he wasn't really overseeing his own children. He was letting them do whatever they wanted to do. He constructed a temple like complex in the mountain, and it became his kind of headquarters. He was very lax with what his children do and not do, because in the end the goal was to study death, the goal was to study dying, the goal was to study what happens after, and contact ghosties and control ghosties and experience the underworld. And as long as that was happening, he was like fine with the thing. He just like left the overseeing of all of the operations to his children, while the dude just spent hundreds of years with himself and books and whatever kind of experiments that he wants to do. He was weirdly a very active third generation vampire. Most of them would like go into slumber. This dude stayed awake and like continued staying awake and doing things, but he was like a very passive one. He didn't want to get involved into any politics. He didn't really want to control or figure out what is happening with this clan. He wanted to sit there and to study them booksies and to do experiments and to figure out death and to eat God, because we all need some life goals, I guess. And he didn't really want to oversee the whole of the clan thing, so he left his children do the running. And as long as they contributed to his studies, it was like, yeah, this is fine. As long as we're all working in the same direction, as long as we all get new insights, this is what I want. This is what I want to do with my own life. The first time when there becomes issues with all of the Cappadocian clan is about the Dark Ages, because what happened was that without the oversight, the clan has expanded really, really a lot. Like, this dude was just closed off with his books, not caring about anything in life. Well, three of his favorite children were just overseeing everything. And I mean, like, children, like the people that he turned into vampires, not like the people that he literally like had with a mortal woman or anything like that. Cappadocius was like so into his books that he was completely not aware about what was happening with his clan, until the mortals told him that his clan is actually the biggest vampire clan in existence. And considering that he never wanted to have like a lot of descendants, he never wanted to have a vast population. And when you have a vast vampiric population, troubles begin to arise, because all of those vampires, they need to feed off something, and there's normally not that many mortals, so you're going to be straining the local populations. You're going to be like competing for resources. That's not very good. Hence why population control was kind of the in thing for vampires during the Dark Ages. So he was like, yeah, this is not good. And summoned everyone, literally all of his children, for an event that will be remembered as a Feast of Folly. Effectively, what happened is that he was like, everybody that's of my clan needs to show up with me in like this town. They need to come to have a meeting with me. And everybody that came, they met at like, I think it was the temple's headquarters or another like a very confusing structure. And everybody that came, he would ask them questions. And people that actually passed the questions, answered the way that was important to him, that still proved that this vampire is aligned with his goals, he would then pretend that their answers were incorrect and would dismiss them, and they would kind of get lost in like the corridors of the structure. So everybody would else that are moving with this crowd of people would be like, awesome, I passed into the next round. I wonder where this is going. But in fact, it was the people that failed that got to continue following the main Cappadocian guy. And he has led them all the way into like a place with no exit in the mountain. And he has sealed the entrance by saying that may no child of his ever leave this place, and may no mortal ever enter it, effectively dooming all of the people that didn't quite fit his standard of what being a Cappadocian is about to eat each other and starve to death. Now, mind you, the focus here was things like, can you read? Do you agree with like these kind of statements about death? This is what like you're interested in studying and whatever. So effectively, you did have to be like inclined to be a necromancer and to like follow the things that, well, the main Cappadocian followed in order to just be kind of dismissed and to continue with your own existence. And those that didn't fit that vibe kind of got sentenced to die. Now, mind you, mind you, there is a bit of a problem with sentencing necromancers to die, which is that they tend to kind of persist after death. Like, they already know that death is not the end, and they have amassed quite a bit of knowledge and quite a bit of power by this point. So a lot of them continued living on the other side of the veil as presumably ghosts at this point, like without a body. They didn't like it wasn't that much of a problem for them. It's not quite clear whether everybody on the other side of the veil had nobody, but there was quite the statement made that some of the ones that died were waiting for the whole seal to be lifted off their physical location so that they can re-enter the mortal world and presumably do whatever the heck they wanted. By this point, they were pretty angry. Angry, angry, angry ghosts. But some of them were like, yeah, this is fine. So they continued traversing the underworld. Excuse me for my own understanding of Vampire the Masquerade lore. I am not entirely sure if they were doing this with a body or without a body, considering that, undead people reside in the underworld, but so do vampires, like previously mentioned Nagaraja and like the city of Enoch that they were defending. So some of them actually managed to get to the city of Enoch and just kind of be like, can I stay here? And because they had a lot of knowledge on the necromancy, people over there were like, yeah, you can stay there. I'm not entirely sure, once again, if they managed to just like open a portal and walk off with their whole vampiric body or whether they died as a ghost, because it is implied that some of them were waiting on the other side as ghosts, but it's not entirely clear if all of them were ghosts, because some of them on the other side in the underworld in the city of Enoch would then continue to produce kids, or rather, turn mortals into vampires. Some of those mortals would be in the actual mortal world. So I am not entirely sure how this whole thing works, but there were agents of the trapped Cappadocians supposedly traveling the world, like the mortal world, and then there were some that were supposedly also embraced into being a Cappadocian while living in the city of Enoch. From the ones that were kind of sentenced to die through the Feast of Folly, it's wraith vampire, vampire wraith, and some of them would also. This will come into play more after the whole seal weakens enough, or otherwise they get out. But some Cappadocians manage to take new bodies later on, which kind of implies that as a ghosty, they would manage to reconstruct the body or take over a corpse or something along those lines to then be a vampire in the mortal world again. It's a bit wibbly wobbly. The point of the story is maybe don't sentence a whole bunch of necromancers to death, because apparently that scenario just doesn't work out how you want it to. So that scenario didn't quite work out as Cappadocius wanted to. one of his own, named Lazarus, one of his own children, kind of just refused to show up for the feast, and also told all of his children to not show up for the feast. As such, he was kind of declared, well, I want to say the enemy of a state, but that's not quite correct. But yeah, Cappadocius was not a very happy man that one of his children just refused to show up for that whole thing, sensing that this whole thing is a trap. So he kind of was all like, "You are my child no more," practically, and we're aggressive towards you now. That guy just kind of stayed in Egypt, which was followers of Set territory, and followers of Set did not get along with Cappadocians, so it wasn't the place that other Cappadocians would really walk to. So Lazarus kind of got to take his children and become his own thing and do his own thing. But now Lazarus is gone from the picture, and Cappadocius is all like, I want somebody to replace Lazarus. So he embraced Giovanni. The Giovanni that started the Giovanni clan, that Giovanni. And that Giovanni ended up betraying him and eating him, hence why we now have a clan of Giovanni. And he had set out to murder and exterminate all Cappadocians, and he got the Camarilla to agree that they're not gonna interfere. By this point, we're in the year 1444. So Camarilla's kind of forming, or was around. They formed around this time, and when they formed, Giovanni got an agreement of like, you do your thing, we're gonna do our thing. Just don't interfere with our war against the Cappadocians. And he went on a killing spree. Very few escaped the killing spree. There are like a couple of Cappadocians that kind of survived here and there, but then you have the whole Lazarus's bloodline just kind of around. There were a couple of Cappadocians that were also a Giovanni that also got to stay around because Cappadocius embraced more than one person from, the Giovanni family. So they kind of got to stay around, I think, by the grace of being like related to Giovanni. Once again, don't quote me on that, but there's a statement that there were a couple of Cappadocians inside the Giovanni clan after Giovanni ate the Cappadocius and took over the clan status and kind of made Cappadocians more of a bloodline and then kind of systematically exterminated them place to place. Now, of course, such a big thing, all remaining Cappadocians were kind of angry at Giovanni for good reason. And remember those angry, angry ghosts that we left in the dead of the mountain? And remember how in the Nagaraja thing I said that the thing happened in 1600s where like a huge storm has hit Enoch and a whole bunch of like Nagaraja died? Well, one of the theories is that it made the veil at that point really, really thin because a lot of shit was happening, and that allowed Cappadocians to sneak back out. And they either reformed bodies or took new bodies. So, yes, we now have a ghost inside a shell that is a vampire. Woo! Necromancy be weird, yo. And these people, they ended up calling themselves the Harbingers of Skulls and ended up aligning themselves with the Sabbat, but kind of tentatively. So they are part of the Sabbat and not part of the Sabbat at the same time. A lot of them took very high like positions in Sabbat, but like they're on the officially unofficially in. Let's just say it like that. Like their status is questionable, but Sabbat liked to have powerful friends, and Cappadocians, now harbingers of skulls, had it had a hate boner for Camarilla for kind of allowing the Cappadocian clan to die off at the hands of the Giovanni, and also had a hate boner for Giovanni for, slaughtering the whole of the Cappadocian clan, on top of having a hate boner for their own dad, effectively Cappadocius, which was no longer among the living. So I suppose that bit of anger kind of got set aside temporarily, so they kind of focused on, well, attacking Camarilla, which was a good thing for Sabbat, hence being aligned to the Sabbat, and they also focused on attacking Giovanni. And they managed to do an attack so big in 2010 that it really destabilized and reduced the numbers of Giovanni in the world to a point where Giovanni had to call the family meeting, which is how we get the whole clan Hekata, where a whole bunch of different necromancer bloodlines come along and they agreed to together make a new clan. So that was a bit of a, Cappadocian turned ghost turned back vampire fault. And they probably quite enjoyed it. But Cappadocians also joined it, and they kind of agreed to, not be killing out the Giovanni again. But that kind of that has some. If you look at their lore sheet, that comes with some exceptions. Okay? Okay. Something to outline. Cappadocians as harbingers of skulls, which is how they called themselves when they joined the Sabbat. And this is once again ghost turned vampire. So, like, through either reforming their own bodies or through, well, getting a body. And I don't know how that works, but it works, like possessing a body, possibly. Weird things. So, Harbingers of Skulls were called Harbingers of Skulls because they did not just have like a deathly pallor at that point, but they also had a very shrunken, shriveled appearance where their skin would kind of tract backwards, making their bones like really, really visible. And some Harbingers of Skulls would also practice just kind of removing the skin off their own face, hence the skull aspect of Harbinger of Skull, hence their name. They also practiced, instead of being on a path of humanity, which is how you keep away from just turning into a mindless beast, they would be on the path of either path of death and the soul or some bizarre variant of Giovanni's path of bones. Both of these paths are very, very similar, and it very much focuses on being not afraid to die, being not afraid to kill, and studying death. If I was to read the what is a sin, like what you shouldn't do on path of death and the soul, and that's very similar to path of the bones, is you should never try to prevent a death. You should not kill without studying death. So, like, anything that murder for the sake of murder does not allow you to gain any new information from it, hence why it's a bit of a no-no. You shouldn't show compassion. You shouldn't show an aversion to death. You should pursue enlightenment by any means necessary. You should kill when it's useful and necessary. You shouldn't frenzy, which is when your beast takes over because you're too close to the fire, you're too hungry, or anything like that. It's almost like your self-preservation instinct, but the Harbingers of Skulls had seen it as a very, very bad thing, mainly because this is not you being enlightened and in control of your body. This is you losing the control of your body, which is not acceptable. You shouldn't be guided by emotion, only logic. You shouldn't fear the final death. As final death is not the death of the soul, as seen by the fact that they were vampires. They died. They turned ghosts. They managed to get themselves back into the mortal world and be vampire again. It's a cycle. You continue existing if you die. Now, mind you, not the same for every vampire, but these are necromancers that we're talking about. They're extra studying the death, so I suppose they know how to be a wraith. They know how to be a ghosty. They don't just disappear into nothingness. And you shouldn't have an attachment to the living world. That's like general outlines of how they lived. As a harbinger of Skull, the Cappadocians were not really embracing or making new vampires, mainly because they weren't really interested in newbies that needed teaching when they had very clear goals as to what they wanted to accomplish, and they aligned themselves with the Sabbat because they could get some powerful vampires in powerful positions to help them accomplish said goals. So they were interested in gaining those links to other vampires, but they weren't really interested in making new vampires and training new vampires because that would be kind of a big time investment, and it's not ain't nobody got time for that, and it's not very useful to them, and mortals weren't very interesting to them. Now, harbingers of skulls, they wore masks because remember that whole thing about like ripping your own facial skin off and the fact that they already looked kind of skeletal and shriveled. Well, you're not gonna walk around like that. So Venetian masks became very popular, potentially as like a jab at Giovanni and that whole feud as well. And they wore masks that kind of translates to the lore sheet for harbingers of Asher, which is what harbingers of skulls become when they join Hecata, or in other words, what the Cappadocians are calling themselves now. So, a harbinger of Asher can purchase these abilities in their lore sheet, which is to do with once again those masks that, well, harbingers of skulls used to wear before. So they named after them, like the Ashen Mask. Harbinger has a corpse per touchstone that they study at one point. So normally you're supposed to have a living touchstone, like a person that you care deeply about and that your humanity is tied to. But if you're a harbinger of Ashur, or in other words, if you're from the clan Cappadocian inside clan Hecata, you can instead have a dead touchstone. And I don't mean like a vampire or anything. It's literally like a corpse that you keep in your room embalmed that you study. As long as it is you that messes around with it, that is fine. If like the corpse decays or falls apart over time, it is not fine if somebody else makes it decay or fall apart. That is when your humanity would suffer. At 2 dots, there's the gold mask, where the harbinger can conceal their actions and those of their group, gaining the equivalent of 4 dots of influence when attempting to cover up a death, because, well, killing was just really a part of what they did because they were studying death. At 3 dots, you get the White Mask, which is the Harbinger is highly respected in their bloodline and gets 3 dice to any social roll against another Harbinger, and 2 to any social roll against any Hecata. At 4 dots, you get the Obsidian Mask, which is the Harbinger is not really a kindred, but a wraith inhabiting a kindred's body. There you go. Ghosty inside a vampire. Jesus Christ, there. This is like such a mindfuck, but they're like such an interesting addition. Learning Oblivion ceremonies may be done so without a teacher, so you can just learn about the underworld by yourself because you are a ghosty inside a body. And they receive 2 dice to resist control effects of Dominate, but Dominate is like vampire mind control. But at the cost of being vulnerable to others performing Oblivion ceremonies and trying to control them as a ghost. And we have the 5 dot, ability from the lore sheet that is the most interesting to me, which is the Lazarine Mask. The Harbinger understands the true agenda of the Harbingers of Skulls was not to eliminate the Giovanni, but all those in the Clan of Death. The Harbinger receives no stains for killing other Hekata or their servants, so you can be like an anti agent inside the Hekata, where your rage is just there to like try and grab and drag all necromancers, all people that were somehow like split off from your original clan into the underworld in order to gain some like semblance of justice. It's like a very self-destructive path, but it fits what Harbingers of Skulls were like, and considering that once again they got trapped in the mountain, they got to starve to death, they became a ghostie, they had to wait around as a ghostie for several hundred years in order to veil to thin, in order to pass back into the living world. Then they took corpses to walk around in, and they formed Harbingers of Skulls. They joined the Sabbat in order to attack Giovanni, in order to attack Camarilla, and also in order to attack other, like, clan heads, other, like, Generation 3 vampires, because you just realized what kind of shithead your own Generation 3 vampire was, because he trapped you in the mountain to begin with. Like, you were angry. You were very, very, very angry. And eventually you managed to reduce Giovanni's numbers enough, with not having a lot of numbers yourself by this point, because you weren't making new vampires, that they have to call an emergency meeting between all necromancers in order to band together as a singular necromancer clan, or else their own existence was being like completely threatened at that point. Like, you have all of that history. Of course you're okay with like killing other necromancers and trying to drag them back into the underworld for justice. After all, you are a ghost inside a corpse body. You are not technically a, well, you are technically a vampire, so like yes and no at the same time. Like Cappadocians, especially Harbingers of Skulls, especially Harbingers of Asher under Hekata clan, become complicated, and I really, really love them for that. Like, this is mind boggling, mind bending, and at the same time, really friggin' interesting. Like, when I want diversity from this game, different ways of playing, and when I complain that version 5 of the game has like reduced the complexity by merging all of the abilities into one, this is like a good example of game complexity. Like, you have a clan whose lore is what the fuck, and you yourself are playing a creature which is not even a vampire. It's like a ghost inside a vampire body, and you have all that pent up aggression behind you. You have like ulterior motives, and you're like inside this clan of necromancy. That is definitely like diversity of gameplay. That is like diversity of thoughts, ideas, what your goals are, how you're gonna be playing that game, and I love them for it. It is what I would normally love inside my bloodlines, and I love that this one got preserved in such an interesting matter. So there was only very couple of things about Cappadocians that we haven't really covered yet, and one of them is that they used to like embrace scholars, people of the pursuits to do with death, dying, spirituality, religion. So they had quite a lot of like monks and priests among themselves, like clan with probably like the most religious people. Once again, don't quote me on this, but there were quite a lot, and they themselves had access to these disciplines until the version 5, where they joined Clan Hekata as Harbingers of Asher. Before all of that happened, before Cappadocians fall, their abilities used to be auspex, which is the ability to sense the unseen, to see ghosties, to see auras, that sort of thing. Fortitude, which is the ability to have thicker skin, and necromancy specifically in the category of mortis, because different necromancers had different paths. Huzzah! As the category of necromancer paths and specifically necromancy under mortis, it's like a certain kind of blood magic almost. You had like three different standard paths and abilities to choose from. So if you chose Grave's Decay, you can do abilities such as at level 1, Destroy the Husk, which turns a corpse into a pile of ashes. Mortal corpses only, mind you. At level 2, you have Rigor Mortis, which allows the vampire to cause rigor mortis in a mortal or undead bodies. So, getting entirely, completely paralyzed, being unable to move doesn't sound very nice. At level 3, you have Wither, which allows the vampire to cripple an opponent's limb, whether they're undead or mortal. The muscles shrivel up, the bones get brittle, and the skin peels. Like, you just killed their arm. That is such a horrific thing to think about. There's also at level 4, you have Corrupt the Undead Flesh. This ability causes the victim to be stricken with a horrible plague. Mortal victims of this ability are highly contagious and easily spread the disease to other mortals and to vampires if their blood is taken, while vampires have a harder time spreading the disease, but are affected by the weakness it causes all the same. So you were just given permanent plague, go you. And at level 5, they have Dissolve the Flesh, which allows the vampire to turn vampiric flesh to ash, which sounds as OP as it gets and really, really friggin' terrifying. Now, you could also decide instead of going for Grave's Decay to go for Corpse in the Monster, which comes at level 1 with Mask of Death, allows the kindred, well, that's vampire, to turn his her body into corpse like state. So effectively, pretend that me be dead. At level 2, you have Cold of the Grave. The vampire enters a state of death wherein they can temporarily feel no emotional or physical pain. So you're effectively turning yourself into a brick. You're an inanimate object now. Level 3, you have Curse of Life. The user causes a vampire to feel destructive aspects of his or her previous life, such as hunger, thirst, etc. Great way of messing with other people's minds. Thumbs up. At level 4, you get Gift of the Corpse. It only lasts for a brief period of time, but this ability removes the inherent weaknesses of a vampire, such as vulnerability to sunlight, fire, and etc. So if there is the issue of you needing to run through a burning building, you can do so, or if you need to flee through sunlight, you can do so as long as the exposure is really, really minimal. And then at level 5, you have the Gift of Life, which is the ability to transform into a semblance of their former self. They also lose their vampire weaknesses and gain the ability to eat, drink, and etc. Like, they are mimicking life to the fullest over there, which is also really friggin' OP. And now we have Cadaverous Animation, which is the last path that you can pick that is just standard base path of Mortis. And mind you, you can't do this in version 5 because I have to remind you, Cappadocians are no longer a thing. They're now harbingers of Asher and part of Ekata, and that comes with that lore sheet that has masks, and you get to use Oblivion like every other necromancer. This is more like an old Cappadocian exclusive thing, which is the abilities that we were talking about up until this point anyway. But I thought that I'll remind you because these things sound like really OP. So you can't just bring this into a version 5 game. And you wouldn't really have a lot of Cappadocians or Harbingers of Skulls in the version 20 game either. You would need to be playing something like Dark Ages in order to properly play a Cappadocian. Coming back to Cadaverous animation, which is the last path, that is just a standard path that you could pick. At level 1, you have Trance of Life. The vampire can cause mild traits of life in a corpse, such as twitching. Nice party trick. At level 2, you have Call the Homuncular Servant. Allows the vampire to cause a small mobile piece of a corpse, like a hand, to reanimate and move about, so you can roleplay the Adams family if you really wanted to. At level 3, you have Raise the Corpse to Service, which allows the vampire to reanimate the corpse into his, her bidding, although it cannot attack or do other complex tasks. So effectively, you're just getting Bone Hilda from The Sims 1, or otherwise known as like a skeleton butler, skeleton servant, skeleton maid. At level 4, you have Call the Athanatos, which transforms a corpse into an undead warrior that the vampire may have trouble controlling. So you have now reanimated a vampire servant, and they can follow complex tasks like attack things. The issue is that they are gonna wildly attack things that are not necessarily what you want them to attack. And at level 5, you have Muster a Corpse Army. An expansion on called the Thanatos. This ability summons a number of corpse warriors that might be controlled by the vampire's willpower, emphasis on might. So you can have a whole group of corpses that you may be controlling, or you might not be controlling. So either way, there's a lot of angry dead people on the battlefield, which I assume is going to be useful as long as you know how to navigate that situation. Thumbs up. Now, let's get back to reading about Cappadocians, and quite specifically about the disciplines that they get as part of Clan Hecata. So they get Auspex, which is once again the ability to see the unseen, to see ghosties. They get Fortitude, which is the ability to toughen their skin and take a lot less damage. And they get Oblivion, which is the merger of shadow abilities and necromancer abilities in version 5 of the game. I don't know what they have done that. It doesn't actually simplify things, but that is what there is. It is, and effectively every necromancer gets this. So unlike Nagaraja that get a special permission to take things like dominate, you don't get such a special permission, but then again, you do get access to a pretty cool lore sheet that allows you to be a ghost inside a vampire's body. And I really, really dig that. This is my best attempt of covering Cappadocians. There's going to be a link to the wiki page in the description down below in case you want to read about it yourself. I'm trying to simplify a lot of things to make it understandable, to make you understand about what they are. And I know that they have become many different things over time. Harbingers of Skulls, Harbingers of Asher, so it might be a bit difficult to follow. And so if you want anyone but like this very rambly woman to explain it to you, the wiki page does a great job. I hope that I kind of covered the bases, explained to you what a Cappadocian is, so you know now whether to eat it with cookies and tea or with milk and sausages. And really, thank you for watching for so long. When we come back, we're going to be talking about Giovanni, and I tend to upload these videos on every Friday, so we're going to be talking about Giovanni. God willing, everything going fine next Friday. For now, what did you think about Cappadocians? How do you like it? Have you ever played them? Have you ever played them in version 5 of the game, either like as Harbingers of Ash, or do you enjoy it? Because once again, this is to me like really cool. The Necromancer bloodlines are like such a mindfuck that they're just really, really cool. So, what I'm trying to say is that I like them really, really much. So, Thank you for watching. Thank you so much, all my Patreon supporters that allow me to make videos such as these. And I hope that I'm gonna see you next week. Toodaloo.